The rain had been pouring down relentlessly as I sat in my car, staring out at the empty road ahead. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the deluge, their rhythmic swaying providing a hypnotic backdrop to my thoughts. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, the red digits glowing 11:43 p.m. I should have been home hours ago, but a sudden work emergency had held me back. With a sigh, I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The soft hum of the radio filled the car, playing an eerie tune that matched the gloomy night. I adjusted the rearview mirror, checking the back seat almost instinctively. It was empty, of course, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't let go of me. I pulled onto the desolate road that cut through the heart of the forest. The towering trees on either side seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The rain continued to fall heavily, creating an impenetrable wall of water just beyond my headlights. The road stretched ahead, disappearing into the darkness. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as the unease in my chest grew. The forest seemed to whisper, its secrets carried by the wind. Every now and then I could swear I saw movement among the trees, shadows that darted out of sight as soon as I turned my gaze toward them. My eyes flicked to the fuel gauge. It was dangerously low. I cursed under my breath, realizing that I had forgotten to stop for gas. There was no way I could turn back now. The nearest gas station was miles away, and the thought of being stranded in this eerie forest sent shivers down my spine. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, urging my car to go faster. The rain continued to pound against the roof, the sound like 1,000 distant drums. The headlights illuminated the road, revealing patches of darkness that seemed to stretch and twist, almost as if the very fabric of reality was warping. A sudden movement ahead caught my attention. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing as I peered into the rain-soaked darkness. Two pale glowing orbs stared back at me, fixed in place like a pair of unblinking eyes. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I was staring at a pair of deer. They stood perfectly still, their bodies tense as if frozen in time. I let out a nervous chuckle, my tension easing slightly. Just deer, I thought to myself. I released the brake and started moving again, but as I passed the deer, one of them suddenly darted in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes once more, the screeching of tires piercing the night. My heart raced as I watched the deer disappear into the darkness, its companion following suit. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. Something was off about those deer, something unnatural. But I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to nerves. I needed to get out of this forest and back to civilization. As I drove on, the rain began to let up, and the forest seemed to grow even quieter. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an owl. I glanced at the clock again. It now read 12:30 a.m. Time seemed to stretch and warp, and I felt a growing sense of disorientation. Suddenly, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road up ahead. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively slowed down. As I got closer, I could see that it was a person, a tall and gaunt figure in tattered clothing. They stood with their back to me, unmoving, as if they were waiting for a ride. A wave of apprehension washed over me. What was someone doing out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this time of night? Every instinct told me to keep driving, to ignore the figure and get as far away as possible. But a nagging feeling tugged at me, a sense of empathy and concern. I pulled over a few feet ahead of the figure, the engine idling as I hesitated. With a sigh, I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" There was no response. The figure remained still, their back turned to me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I was determined not to let fear control me. I opened the car door and stepped out, the rain immediately soaking through my clothes. "Hey!" I called out again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" Still, there was no response. I took a cautious step closer, my eyes fixed on the figure's hunched form. My heart pounded in my chest, and a voice in the back of my mind screamed at me to turn and run. But I couldn't leave someone out here alone in the dark. As I reached out a hand to touch the figure's shoulder, they suddenly turned around. My breath caught in my throat as I stared into a face that was both familiar and utterly foreign. It was my own face, twisted into a grotesque grin. The figure's eyes were empty voids, and its fingers reached out toward me. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling onto the wet pavement. The figure advanced, its movements jerky and unnatural. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I fumbled for my car keys. I managed to unlock the door just in time, throwing myself inside and slamming the door shut. The figure pressed its face against the window, its distorted grin inches away from me. Its breath fogged up the glass, and its empty eyes seemed to bore into my soul. With a trembling hand, I started the engine and peeled out of there, the figure disappearing into the darkness behind me. I drove for what felt like an eternity, the forest giving way to open road. The rain had finally stopped, and the first light of dawn began to break through the horizon. My hands were still shaking, and my heart raced with a mix of fear and disbelief. As I finally reached the gas station, I pulled over and stumbled out of the car, my legs barely able to support me. I leaned against the car, my chest heaving, and looked back at the road I had just come from. It was empty now, the figure nowhere in sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister, something beyond my understanding. As I filled up my tank, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see those pale, glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. From that night on, I avoided driving on desolate roads at night. The memory of that twisted figure, that mirror image of myself, haunted my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest held secrets, ancient and malevolent, lurking just beyond the veil of darkness. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw those empty eyes and that ghastly grin, a reminder of the horror that awaited those who dared to venture into the unknown.